Aloha! Welcome to Departures to Alpha Centauri. My name is Merlin. I'm your tour guide. We had a live program where Mary, a 4-year-old, demonstrated how we have 3 different parts inside of us, and the demonstration involved golf balls. We filled up a big pickle jar full of a whole bunch of golf balls, and it involved marbles, and we added the marbles to the pickle jar and demonstrated how the marbles fit down between the golf balls. And then the last items were BBs. And the purpose of the demonstration was to show how a vessel like a pickle jar or even a goldfish bowl can be filled more than once. We can fill it first with the golf balls, then we fill it a second time with the marbles, and then the last time we fill it with the BBs. Well, there was a purpose for that demonstration, and that was to acquaint you with the 3 different parts, the 3 different bodies that are inside of us, and also to explain what happens if we're missing some of those parts, if the golf balls, the marbles, or the BBs are not present. So tonight, I'd like to demonstrate or explain how that works. Here we have a chart showing the 3 different items up at the top. We have golf balls, marbles, and BBs along the top of the chart. Under golf balls, they represent our physical body and our atoms, and in a sense, our atoms are like a suit of clothes. When we depart this world, we just discard this suit of clothes. We don't need them anymore. And it's not a big deal because we can come back, and we do. Turns out we actually live many lives. Reincarnation is part of the human experience, as much as the churches might not want us to believe that. The next item on the list at the top are marbles, and those represent the astral material and also our spirit. And we can see our spirit anytime we have a picture taken with a Carillion camera. If you go to a carnival or a fair, you can get a picture taken, and you'll see this glow all around your body, and that's your aura. And that is not atoms. That is astral material, and it's a projection of your spirit or your astral body. And then the third item are the BBs, and they represent our etheric body or our soul, as we might better know it. And it's our soul that is what experiences pleasure and pain. If you look back to the left, you'll see that our spirit is the life provider, and then our physical body is the suit of clothes. Well, if you are missing any of these components, then you're not a complete human. And that's where we'll start tonight. As you look at this chart once more, on the left side, you can see the words prenatal, postnatal, and galactic travel. Well, the prenatal items are the first 3 rows below those categories. And as you look across the first row, you'll see out, in, and out. And then the state of being for that is the moment of conception. What that means is when babies are first conceived, it's not from sperm and eggs. It's from something completely different. Look at some of the articles in the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the country. They have an article about 29 ectopic pregnancies. These are women that have gotten pregnant after they've had total hysterectomies, in which there's no eggs, there's no ovaries, no uterus, but they get pregnant. Well, how can 29 women get pregnant without what we're told are the basic ingredients? Well, that'll be explained in another show. And the same with men. They can have vasectomies and still get their girlfriends and their wives pregnant. And how can that happen if you don't have sperm? Well, it's because babies start out as an astral body, as a little tiny human. And when they're first introduced into the mother, into the uterus, they're all astral material. That's what this first line talks about. There's no atoms, and there's no etheric material. It's just the astral body. Then as you look at the second line, you can see in, and out. What is happening is as the fetus is growing, atoms are bonding to the astral body. And it's still not a complete human. It has atoms and it has astral material, but there's no soul. There's no etheric material yet. Well, we've heard a lot of controversy in legislatures around the country about when life actually begins. And their rationale for a fetus having life is that the fetus has pain. Well, as we go down this list, you're going to see that pain can only come when etheric material is present. And in the case of a fetus inside of a mother, the fetus does not yet have its soul, its own etheric material, but it's surrounded by the mother's etheric body. And that's what that part in parentheses is about. The pain response in a fetus is provided by the outer etheric body, but the fetus is not yet a complete human. Then the third line in prenatal talks about in, and in. That's the moment of birth. At that point, you now have all three components. You've got a physical body with atoms, you've got an astral body, you've got a spirit, and you have an etheric body with a soul. And now you're a complete human. That's the only time that a baby is a complete human. So for all of you pro-lifers out there, based on this chart, you don't have an argument when it comes to abortion. But that's another subject. We don't want to cover that tonight. So then we go to the next line, which is under postnatal. Now this is after you're born. And at the moment of birth, you're a complete human. But sometimes things can go wrong. And those include having your etheric material, your etheric body, your soul, come out of your body. In the case of the soul being absent, you've still got atoms, you've still got astral material, we're on the fourth line, but there's no etheric material. And your pleasure and pain are gone, except there is a minimal pain response. If you read under state of being, it shows, we talk about the lights are on, but nobody's home, and essentially you're in a coma. Difference between an adult missing a etheric body and a fetus missing etheric body is that the adult has no pain response. There's no pleasure or pain, but the fetus without an etheric body still can experience pain, but it comes through the mother's etheric body. Then we go to the next line, the fifth line down, and in this case we're talking about the atoms being in, the astral body being out, and the etheric body still being in. In this case, the lights are out and nobody's home. What this means is that there's no pulse, there's no breathing, no metabolism, but the body is not decomposing. The body lies there, but nothing's going on. Well, this is what the Hawaiians could do. We talked about this in the last program. Prior to the missionaries, any Hawaiian could astral travel, and they tell the family, I'm going to go lay down days, weeks, months, or years, and leave me alone. And they would actually go into suspended animation. There would be no heartbeat, no breathing, no metabolism, but they were not dead. They were just in astral travel. And the body stayed viable. It didn't decompose. They weren't buried. And that's one of the great ironies of our world, our civilized world. When they open up coffins, in some cases they'll find finger scratches. The guys were not dead. They were in astral travel. They were in suspended animation, but they got buried anyway. The problem is when they returned to that body later on, they were buried. They couldn't get out. So don't bury people until you know for sure. And a great story that you can read in World Book Encyclopedia involves our first president, George Washington. He told his wife, Martha, don't bury me for 2 days. Make sure I'm dead. He knew. And people in the past knew this stuff. Plus, the Hawaiians have an expression called Hawaiians spit salt, and that has to do with when Hawaiians are in astral travel, back in the old days, before we had screens on the windows, they had to pack all the orifices with salt. Because in the tropics, if you have a moist body laying around, even if it's at room temperature, the bugs go nuts. They want to fill it up. And in order to keep the bugs out, the rest of the family would put salt in the mouth, the ears, the nose, all the orifices, and then when the Hawaiians returned, they'd have to go, spit the salt out. So that's where the expression comes from. It's still part of the culture in Hawaii. They knew about astral travel, and they still do. My grandson had his third grade teacher has an uncle who still astral travels, and he tells the family, I'm going in the bedroom for the next couple months, no bottomy. And they don't. And the advantage is, in today's world, we have screens on the windows, so the bugs can't get in the body, so no more having to put salt in all the orifices. Makes a big difference. So let's go on to the next line under postnatal, and in that case, there are no atoms. The atoms are out. The astral material is in, and the etheric material is in. Well, this is physical death. You're now no longer with us. You've crossed to the other side, and your atoms stay behind. You discard the suit of clothes, and it's no big deal. But your countenance remains. Now, your countenance is your visual aspect, the way you look, and when you're on the other side, a person's image continues, as you see underneath physical death. People that have near-death experiences and cross to the other side will meet with their family and friends, and they still look like they did back when they were alive. So we don't lose our physical appearance after we discard this suit of clothes. And then our last item is galactic travel. Now, the point of this program, and the name of this program, is Departures to Alpha Centauri, is to explain to you how we can get from this solar system to another place that is 4.2 light years from here. Now, using current technology, it would take us 50,000 years to travel from our Earth to one of the planets in the Alpha Centauri system. We don't live that long. There's no way a human could make that voyage. And even if you tried to put humans in a voyage like that and had, say, a giant space colony that was traveling, 50,000 years is longer than we've been on the Earth to begin with. And you go crazy. People will go nuts in that kind of enclosure. So the moral of the story is we can't use conventional current technology. If we're going to get from here to Alpha Centauri, we have to have a whole new way to travel. And that's actually the name of this program. This is New Ways to Travel, Part 2. Well, there is another way to travel, and it was actually performed by a ship in World War II. If those of you that are into science fiction, even though this may not be science fiction, may have seen a movie that came out in the mid-'80s called The Philadelphia Experiment. And in this program, it talked about a ship that disappeared from Philadelphia Harbor, and this was a big ship. It was a USS Eldridge, a destroyer, and it went from Philadelphia to Norfolk, Virginia, in the blink of an eye. And it stayed in Norfolk on a berth next to a British Navy ship for about 15 minutes. Then it disappeared from Norfolk, Virginia, and returned to Philadelphia. When it came back to Philadelphia, it was a horror story, as you will see in the movie clip I'm about to show you. The purpose of this test was originally to make U.S. Navy ships invisible to radar. The testing had started in June of 1943 and continued on for about 6 months. It was at the end of the testing period that the ship literally disappeared. When the ship returned to Philadelphia Harbor, some of the men had become part of the ship. The men that were on the deck, on the outside of the ship, had actually become embedded in the decks and in the bulkheads. Their bodies were half metal and half men. It was very tragic because if your body's half metal, your blood can't flow, and these men were dying. So the Navy had to send its shore patrol, its police, on board the ship and euthanize those men. They had to kill those men. It was tragic. The curious part is that the men on the inside of the ship were unaffected. They weren't stuck in the deck or the bulkheads. There must be an explanation. We have been observing UFOs appearing and disappearing in our world. they are doing the same thing that the Eldridge did. The Eldridge disappeared from Philadelphia, reappeared in Norfolk, Virginia, disappeared from Norfolk, and reappeared in Philadelphia. Except in the case of the Eldridge, the men on the outside of the ship were stuck into the body of the ship. Well, maybe it's not a coincidence that when UFOs appear and disappear, there's nobody on the outside of the ship. In order for us to depart from this world to Alpha Centauri, we will have 4 choices regarding our method of departure. If we're going to go to Alpha Centauri and stay there, we leave our clothes on when we are transported. But if we're going to go to Alpha Centauri and then return, we have to have our clothes off. On this chart, you'll notice on line 3 for the hot tub transporter that when we're transported, we have no clothes on. Now, all the other methods, we do have clothes on, but for the hot tub, we don't. But we can return. That's the key. If you want to come back to this world, you have to leave it without your clothes. You leave your clothes here. That way, when you come back, your clothes will be waiting for you. Plus, when you are transported outside of any kind of ship, you have to have bonded atoms. And that will be explained in another program. The reason the sailors were stuck in the deck and the bulkheads of the ship is that they had an uncontained reassembly of their atoms. And if you're in an uncontained space and your atoms are not bonded to your astral, when they are reassembled, they can bond to something else. And that's what happens to those sailors. Their atoms bonded to the ship itself. So the moral of the story is, you don't travel on the astral plane outside of any kind of vehicle or group unless your atoms are bonded. Now back to this chart, we show how you can return after you've been transported in a hot tub transporter. Then you will be given an individual transporter, just like this little guy. Now this is a miniature, this is the model. We have a volunteer who's inside of it for us. But this is proportional to what a man-sized or woman-sized transporter would be. It's 6 feet tall, 2 feet wide, and 1 feet deep. And then, as you will see in another program, it can be bigger than 1 feet deep. Especially in my case, I have to use a 16-inch thick midsection because of my opu, as we say in Hawaiian. But for all of you skinny folks, a 1 foot by 2 foot by 6 foot will be just the right size. And after you come back from Alpha Centauri, after having been transported in the hot tub transporter, you will then be given your own transporter to go back and forth in. And to also travel anywhere in our world. You will be able to travel to other people's transporters. You'll have a communicator in which you will tell Galactic Command where you want to go, and then they will take care of it. It'll be exciting. That's coming. Hopefully we'll see that in March of 2012. That's when it's to begin. In regards to walking on board the ship, this is what we're talking about. This is a Victor ship. Later this year, 2011, thousands and thousands of these ships are going to arrive in our world. And it's these 300-foot wide ships, the Victor ships, that you will then go on board to be transported to Alpha Centauri. We have a video by Dr. Frank Stranges, a very close friend of my wife's and myself, in which he reads from the Dead Sea Scrolls and describes how people in times past walked on board these ships. And it should have been in the Bible, because what he's reading from are the New Testament and the Old Testament, except those verses are not found in any Bible today. They have been taken out because the powers that be could not explain how humans were walking on board UFOs, spaceships, but they did. Jesus walked on board the ships, Daniel walked on board, Ezekiel walked on board, Martin Luther walked on board. More than likely, a lot of our science fiction writers like H.G. Wells and even Gene Roddenberry may have walked on board. UFOs have played a major role in our world for thousands of years, and unfortunately, we have been kept ignorant of that fact. But this is the ship that's talked about right here. This is the ship that we walk into, and we can walk into it with our clothes on, but we can't return. Once you've gone on board the Victor ship, you are then taken up above our planet, and you get to go on board the mothership. This is called a Starship. This is in orbit above our planet. Later this year and during 2012, there will be many of these above our planet. This is an enormous ship. This ship is 14 miles long, 7 miles wide, and 7 miles high. And all these little black dots that you see down below, those are these. This Victor ship that is 300 feet across, when it approaches the mothership up in space, looks like that. It's tiny in comparison to the mothership. Mothership is 14 miles. She's much, much bigger. And while we're on the subject of being transported, here is what the hot tubs look like. These are wood hot tubs. They're made of clear Western red cedar. They're held together with metal hoops, and they're totally natural. You might say they're organic. There's no electricity for pumps, and there's no commercial form of heating. There's no electric heating or propane heating. Instead, these hot tubs have a wood stove in the back here, and you throw a piece of oak in the wood stove. It's a marine aluminum wood stove, and one piece of wood will heat that water up to 104 degrees. So these are nice and comfortable. In this picture, it's kind of a caricature, we see gnomes running to join two other gnomes, a woman and a man, an old man with a baby, in the water. But we will have lots of these hot tubs all over the world for people to make their hot tub transporting. The subject of the Philadelphia experiment has been kept secret by the United States government for many, many years. The people that were involved in the experiment, the Navy personnel and the contractors, were sworn to secrecy. They actually had to sign affidavits that they would never tell anyone. But by the 1980s, a lot of those 20-year-old sailors and contract personnel back in the 1940s had now gotten into their 60s. And they started coming forward and telling their story. And in the process, books have been written and movies have been made about the Philadelphia experiment. A movie entitled The Philadelphia Experiment was released in 1985. And in this movie, portions of the actual story are used. At the beginning of the movie, you see the ship disappear. It's out in Philadelphia Harbor, and all of a sudden, poof, and it's gone. Later during the movie, you see the sailors who were on the outside of the ship stuck in the deck and in the bulkheads. It's a tragic part of the movie, but they have included that. Both the beginning of the movie, where the ship disappears, and the end of the movie, where the sailors are stuck in the deck, are not science fiction. More and more individuals who were part of the Philadelphia experiment, Project Rainbow, are coming forward. It's now been 70 years since World War II, since all this took place. Most of those involved in the Philadelphia experiment are now in their 90s, late 80s and 90s. They no longer fear the government, and they are coming out of hiding, in a sense, to tell us what actually happened. And it's very important for us in our time today, because the lessons learned from the Philadelphia experiment can then be applied to the transporting that humans are going to be making to Alpha Centauri. In reality, the powers that be understood that, but maybe the Philadelphia experiment can be a lesson for us today to understand what not to do. Humans didn't really understand the process when they first started trying.
It's beginning to fade, sir. She's gone.
Interesting book has also been written about the Philadelphia experiment. It's called The Montauk Project. This is a continuation of what was discovered in 1943 by the corporations. They actually set up a facility in northeastern Long Island at an old Air Force base called Montauk, and they did some really dastardly things. This book is almost horrifying to read. It's written by Preston Nichols with Peter Moon, and you might say it's must reading, but it's also very depressing. And then there's several sequels to that book, including the second one called Montauk Revisited, Adventures in Synchronicity, also by Preston Nichols and Peter Moon. It's a whole series, but it's very sobering to read. And then, perhaps the most famous of all the books about the Philadelphia experiment is The Philadelphia Experiment. It's a paperback this size by Charles Berlitz. He's the author of the Bermuda Triangle in consultation with William L. Moore, and it has enormous amounts of information about what took place. There are black and white photos of the ship itself, the people involved, all the different characters, and there's quite a cast. The ship, the Eldridge, was later used by the Greek Navy, and I believe it was decommissioned just recently, and it's been totally destroyed. It's been recycled. Here's a picture of Albert Einstein, right here on the left, meeting with, let me see, Albert Einstein conferring with naval officers in his study at Princeton, New Jersey on July 24th, 1943. That comes from the National Archives. At the beginning of our program, we talked about how this program is a continuation of our first live program that starred Mary and the pickle bottle full of golf balls, marbles, and BBs. And at the beginning, we talked about how our bodies are made up of those three different types of materials. That the golf balls are the atoms, the marbles are the astral material, and the BBs are our etheric material. And another way of saying it is that the golf balls are our physical body, the marbles are our spirit, and the BBs are our soul. And each one of these materials plays a role in our state of being. And at the beginning, we talked about how while we're in our mother's stomachs, in our prenatal form, we do not have atoms, and we do not have etheric material, but we do have astral material. We have a spirit. When we're first conceived, at the moment of conception, all we are is spirit. The material that the UFOs and all of our friends that are traveling around the galaxy are composed of when they don't have their bonded atoms. Then, as we grow inside of our mother's womb, we start to add atoms. Atoms begin to bond to our astral, to our spirit material, and we start becoming a human, more of a human, a physical human. But we still don't have the etheric material. The fetus is growing, the atoms are bonding to the astral body, but here's the curious part. Babies inside the mother don't have any pain of their own. It's because in order to experience pain, you have to have etheric material. And the etheric material is still out of the body. But all the fundamentalists want to tell us that life begins at conception. No, there's no pain response. The only pain response that a fetus exhibits is the pain that comes through the mother. The mother's body has etheric material, and it surrounds the baby, and if she feels pain, the baby feels pain. And anytime you poke a baby, poke at a pregnant mother, the baby will flinch on the inside because it's feeling the pain that the mother feels as you're poking. But in reality, the baby does not have pain. the fetus is not yet a viable human, because it's not a human until the etheric comes in. That's at the moment of birth. At the moment of birth, the baby is a complete human. But up until that time, it's not. Then, once you're born, you are in our world. You're now postnatal. But here's something. You can also lose your etheric while you're in the physical, while you're alive. And in that case, the lights are on, but nobody's home. You're in a coma. You essentially don't feel pain anymore. When people are in comas, you can stick them with needles. They won't feel it. Now, there is some pain response. The body's functioning, but there's very minimal pain response. The lights are on, but nobody's home. So in other words, the heart's beating, the blood's pumping, the person is breathing, and there's metabolism. They still have to be fed intravenously, but nobody's home. The etheric is out. The soul is out of the body. Now there's another case where another one of the three bodies can be out. That's in the case of the astral being out. Now in this case, you still have the atoms, the body's still there, and the soul's still there, but the astral has left. Well, in that case, the lights are out and nobody's home. What that means is there's no breathing, there's no heartbeat, there's no blood circulation, there's no metabolism. They look like they're dead. There's nothing going on. Their body's even at room temperature, but they're not dead. They're just not home. They're out exploring the world, the astral world. And don't bury them. Now, people 100, 200, 300 years ago knew this. It would appear sometimes that people had died because their bodies weren't functioning, but they wouldn't bury them for several days after that. George Washington told his wife Martha, "Don't bury me for 2 days after I die, because I may come back to life." And if you go to some cemeteries in the older parts of our world, you will find bells next to the headstones with a wire going down a little pipe. Well, that pipe goes down to the coffin. So if the guy comes back to life while he's in the coffin, he can ring the bell and somebody will come and dig him up. The saddest part of the story is that when they do dig up coffins, in 2 of every 1,000 coffins they dig up, they find scratches. The guys have come back to life and they're trying to get out, but they can't. They're 6 feet under. Well, maybe they were smarter than us in older times, and they knew that when somebody went into astral travel, they weren't dead. You leave them alone. And my grandson's 3rd grade teacher has an uncle who still astral travels. And he tells the family, "I'm going to go in the bedroom for the next few weeks or months and no bottomy." That's a Filipino term in Hawaii. Basically, he says, "I'm going to go into astral travel. My body's going to be there on the bed. I won't be breathing. I won't have any heartbeat. I won't be eating. I won't be going to the bathroom. But I'm not dead. Don't call 911. Just leave me alone." And they'd check on him every so often, and he'd be fine. The body'd just be there. But then a few months later, he'd come back to life. And that was common in Hawaii up until the missionaries. Any Hawaiian could astral travel. Now the problem was, before the missionaries, everybody lived in grass huts. Grass huts don't have screens. Grass huts don't even have windows. And if you leave a moist body laying around in the tropics, it will fill up with bugs. Bugs just love moist places. So in order to keep the body from being contaminated, the rest of the family would pack all the orifices with salt. They put salt in the mouth, salt in the nose, salt in the ears, salt any other place they might need to put it. And then when the Hawaiian came back and reanimated their body, they'd have to go, "Patui!" and spit out the salt. So we have an expression in our Hawaiian culture that says Hawaiians spit salt. That's talking about returning from astral travel. And that's exactly what the Hawaiians used to do. They used to travel the world, travel the galaxy on the astral plane. We're going to be traveling the astral plane as well. That's our only way we can get out of this world before the end of 2012. On winter solstice 2012, we all have to be out of here. All 7 billion humans have to be off this planet. And it's going to happen. It's not a problem. It's already planned out. Don't worry. Main thing is, don't worry. You're going to be fine. We're all going to make it. 2012 is nothing to be afraid of. In fact, 2012 is going to be the most awesome experience that mankind has ever had. So, if we continue with the chart as part of our review, if you lose your atoms, if your atoms are now separated from your marbles and your etheric, you're dead. That's physical death, but your countenance remains. Now, we all have an appearance, and it doesn't go away. So our image continues after we go to the other side, or after we go on the ship and go to Alpha Centauri. You will still look like you do right now, and when you go to the other side, when you go to heaven, you still look like you do right now. People that have near-death experiences cross to the other side and get to visit their family and friends that have passed before them, but they know it's their family and friends because they still look just like they did when they were alive. And then they come back, they're having a near-death experience, so they come back and they tell us about it, which is kind of awesome. So that completes our pre-birth and post-birth, postnatal, but then we have one more factor, and that's travel, and that's galactic travel. The story is that our atoms are going to go poof. They're going to be deconstructed, disassembled, and they'll be bonded to our astral, and then we get to travel on the astral plane. Now remember, on the astral plane, there's no time and there's no gravity. So we can go anywhere in the galaxy like that. And when we get there, it's still the same time as when we just left here. And then we can stay there for a while, and then we leave there and we come back, and now the time has moved forward on our clock here on Earth, but we haven't lost any time in the transit. So we're still in our time frame. And once we come back, then everything is reconstructed. Our atoms are reconstructed, they're reassembled at the destination, and the most amazing part is, not only are we a complete human again, but when our atoms get reconstructed, we are in perfect health. So if you had anything wrong with you before you got in the hot tub, before you left, it's now fixed. If you had cancer, high blood pressure, diabetes, heart problems, anything like that, it's all fixed. You're like brand new. You're good to go once you come back. So this whole crossing process, this traveling process, is all a plus plus. And we're actually hoping that we can find lots of volunteers to make the crossings. You have a method, you have a choice of methods to do your departures, and we're hoping that we get lots of volunteers to do the hot tub transporting. They get to go to Alpha Centauri, then they get to come back, and then once they're back, they get their own individual transporter. They get this guy, so then, and you carry this around with you, and you can take it apart. In another show, I show you guys how it's all just PVC pipes that are threaded, and you screw them together and unscrew them. And so you can take this anywhere you want, put it together, and poof, and off you go again. But the reason we want people to do the hot tub transporting is that way we have testimonials. Because one of the best forms of advertising is where people do whatever it is they're talking about. And if you've gone to Alpha Centauri and come back, then you can have an individual transporter and you can tell everybody about your experience. which is always the best way. So we hope you've enjoyed all these explanations about different ways to travel, and continue to watch our programs in the future. Much more information is coming. So at this point, I'd like to wish you all aloha and ahui ho. Shaka.